11:45 p.m. My new apartment still smelled like paint and cardboard. I was sitting on the floor, my back against a couch that didn't have legs yet. 12 hours ago, I'd been on the 38th floor of Vanta Bridge. Now I had a folding lamp, 3 unopened boxes, and silence. The incident pager, the one I'd worn clipped to my waistband for 8 years, was no longer mine. I'd handed it to security at noon, signed the form, watched them log it into a plastic bin. End of responsibility. And yet my personal phone kept vibrating across the glass coffee table. And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. Buzz. Pause. Buzz again. Iris Romano. The message preview appeared before I could think. Boards in a closed session. Atlas just started flashing red. Don't answer any calls. I didn't call her back. I opened my laptop instead. The Wi-Fi hesitated. Like even it wasn't sure what it wanted to show me. I navigated to the company's public status page, the same one our clients relied on. No sirens, no dramatic language. Just a thin yellow banner blinking at the top, service degradation detected. I stared at it longer than I should have. Atlas wasn't collapsing. Not yet. It was protecting itself. My gaze drifted to the framed photo on the table beside me. My daughter at the beach last summer, hair tangled by wind, laughing at something outside the frame. I'd promised her that once the final migration phase was complete, I'd finally be home for dinner again. I hadn't deleted a single file, hadn't shut down a single server, hadn't sent a threatening email. I'd simply walked away. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a corporate number. I turned it face down. 12 hours ago. They told me I was no longer necessary. So why was my phone the one lighting up the moment a billion-dollar system started blinking yellow, and why was I so calm? 9 months? That's how long Atlas Switch consumed my life. 9 months of midnight migrations, staged rollbacks, weekend load simulations, and standing in a freezing data center at 3 a.m. because I didn't trust a dashboard alone. Atlas wasn't just a routing upgrade. It was the backbone of Vanta Bridge's payment and logistics engine. Every shipment, every transaction, every reconciliation ran through it. When we hit full cutover without a major incident, the CEO shook my hand in front of the executive team. Once restructuring settles, he'd said, smiling for the room, we'll formalize the VP role. You've earned it. Restructuring never settled. Quarter after quarter, the language shifted. After the next board review, after we finalize headcount, after budget season, each time, I nodded. Each time, I went back to work because my team needed stability, because my daughter needed health insurance, because somewhere in me, I still believed performance would eventually outweigh politics. Then Evan Hale arrived, 24, fresh title VP of Transformation, son of the CEO, educated, articulate, confident in a way only someone who has never had to doubt himself can be. In his first town hall, he spoke about leaning operations and unlocking trapped value. He never used the word layoffs. He didn't have to. In private meetings, he called veteran engineers legacy overhead. We weren't expertise. We were cost centers. I watched him scan org charts like a general studying a battlefield. He didn't need to dismantle Atlas. He needed to win a clean budget cut large enough to impress the board. And in a spreadsheet, my department was a tempting number. When you build a structure that holds everything up, you think you're the architect. But to someone chasing quarterly optics, you're just a line item waiting to be deleted. A week before I was fired, Nadira and I were in conference room C, reviewing the Atlas documentation for the 3rd time that quarter. Not the architecture diagrams, not the performance benchmarks. The compliance appendix. Most executives never read that section. It didn't have charts or projections. It had obligations. Vanta Bridge's largest financial clients required something specific, at least 4 certified operators actively assigned to Atlas at all times. Not on payroll, not available if needed. Actively credentialed, logged, and registered in the system. It wasn't about ego. It was about risk containment. If the number dropped below 4, The system was contractually required to enter restricted operational mode. Restricted mode didn't shut anything down. It didn't trigger alarms or fireworks. It simply reduced processing thresholds, tightened validation filters, and blocked high-risk transactions. It protected data. It slowed revenue. It's basically a legal seatbelt, Nadira said, tapping the page. Exactly. I replied, uncomfortable, but non-negotiable. I drafted an email that afternoon. Subject, certified operator threshold Atlas compliance risk. I outlined the clause. I explained the trigger conditions. I stated clearly that any staffing changes had to be sequenced with credential transfers. I CC'd legal. I CC'd compliance. Evan responded within an hour. One word, noted. No questions, no clarification, no request for a mitigation planning. Just a polite acknowledgement that functioned like a period at the end of a sentence. I stared at that reply longer than I should have. He thought noted closed the conversation. He didn't realize it did something else entirely. Because once that warning was documented, once the risk was acknowledged in writing, any decision that ignored it would no longer be an oversight. It would be deliberate. And deliberate decisions leave trails. Evan believed noted was the end of the discussion. In reality, it was the first line of a verdict waiting to be executed. The boardroom was all glass and silence. Quarterly budget review. Slides preloaded. Faces already tight. I stood at the end of the table and brought up the failover upgrade proposal. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was insurance-redundant routing paths, automated traffic draining, hardened replication nodes, the kind of investment that only matters when everything else fails. If we don't upgrade, I said calmly, we increase the probability of cascade latency during peak loads. Not today, but eventually. One of the board members shifted in his seat. He knew what that meant. Eventual failure always arrives at the worst possible time. Evan leaned back, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. We are not building for hypothetical disasters, he said. We are building for growth. It's not hypothetical. I replied, it's statistical. He smiled, thin and tight, with respect. Mara, we are currently paying a premium for your fear. We need speed, agility, not worst-case obsession. The room cooled a few degrees. I didn't raise my voice. Speed without containment, I said evenly, isn't agility. It's exposure. A few heads turned toward Evan. I wasn't attacking him. I was stating physics. But physics in a boardroom can feel like defiance. For a second, I saw it, the flicker in his expression. Not confusion, not disagreement. Embarrassment. I had corrected him publicly. In front of people whose approval he needed, he closed his laptop slowly. That will be all for this item. He said, the meeting moved on, but the decision had already been made, just not about the budget. When power feels threatened, it doesn't reevaluate. It retaliates. And when the ego of the person holding authority is bruised, they don't fix the mistake. They eliminate the person who exposed it. He didn't call me into an office. He didn't schedule a private meeting. Evan chose the open floor. 40 desks, glass walls, half the department within earshot. He walked straight toward my workstation. Posture straight, voice calm enough to feel rehearsed. Mara, he said, loud enough for others to pause mid-keystroke. You're too slow for the new era we're building. Silence spread across the room like spilled ink. Pack your things. Someone near the back muttered something under their breath. Iris stood up halfway from her chair before I gave her a slight shake of my head. Evan continued, turning so everyone could hear him clearly. And let me be clear, anyone who chooses to walk out with her will be terminated immediately. There it was. Not a performance review. A spectacle. I felt every eye on me. He expected anger, or tears, or at least a defense. Instead, I closed the dashboard window on my screen and faced him. Have you read the Atlas Compliance Appendix carefully, I asked? Not sarcastic, not emotional, just precise. He laughed lightly, dismissively. Legal handles legal, not you. A few people looked uncomfortable. A few looked afraid. I studied his face for a moment. 24 years old, confident, certain he understood every moving piece of the machine he'd inherited. I smiled, not out of spite, not because I thought I'd won anything, but because I understood something he didn't. Understood. I said. I reached for the framed photo of my daughter and placed it in my bag. He thought he was removing resistance. What he had actually done was remove the last operational safeguard standing between his decisions and the consequences of them. I wasn't smiling because I was pleased. I was smiling because I knew the company's final safety brake had just been detached by the very person who believed he was accelerating it into the future. I packed slowly, not to stall, not to dramatize it, just methodically like I approached everything else. My notebook, my access token, the framed photo already tucked into my bag. No one spoke. The office felt suspended, like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I walked toward the exit, and then I heard a chair move. Iris stood first. She didn't look at Evan. She didn't look at me. She simply unclipped her badge and placed it flat on her desk. The sound was soft. Plastic against laminate. Troy followed. Then Nadira. Then Laura. Craig. Each one stood without announcement. Without speeches. 6 senior engineers who had spent years keeping Atlas stable through storms no one else even knew existed. Neil remained seated. He stared at his screen. Jaw tight. I knew what he was calculating. His medical coverage. His daughter's therapy sessions. The mortgage. I met his eyes but didn't say a word. This had to be his decision. The silence stretched. Then Neil stood. Slowly. Deliberately. He removed his badge and set it down beside the others. 6 white desks, 6 pieces of plastic, a line of quiet defiance. Evan clapped once, sharp and amused. Good, he said. That saves us a fortune in payroll. He walked to his laptop at the central station, logged into the HR portal, and began confirming status changes. Resigned. 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 He hit enter on his screen. It was just headcount reduction. In the compliance system, something else updated. Certified operator count below threshold. Evan believed he had just trimmed excess cost. He didn't realize he had triggered a countdown tied to a clause he'd dismissed with a single word. And some timers. Once started, don't stop just because someone regrets pressing the key. The compliance engine didn't panic. It didn't shout. It simply observed. At 4:12 p.m., the HR update synchronized with the operational registry. Certified operator count dropped from 4 to 1 active credential. That was below the contractual minimum. At 4:13 p.m., an automated message was generated and routed to executive distribution. Subject operational threshold. Not met. Engaging restricted mode. No drama. No red flashing sirens. Just protocol. Restricted mode wasn't a shutdown. It was a legal safeguard translated into code. The system tightened validation layers, reduced throughput ceilings, and blocked high-risk financial transactions. It prioritized data integrity over speed. Revenue slowed, exposure decreased, and from a purely technical standpoint, everything was working exactly as designed. Evan skimmed the email on his phone between back-to-back calls. Compliance noise, he muttered, forwarding it to a general operations inbox. By 5:00 p.m., Skyhammer Managed Services had been granted elevated access. Their lead technician dialed in remotely, scanning dashboards he barely understood. We're seeing throttling behavior. Someone from Skyhammer said on speaker, "It's probably a stuck flag," Evan replied. "Reset it. Full system reset." The technician asked. "Do what you need to do," Evan said. "We can't afford lag." Skyhammer initiated a controller restart without draining traffic or mapping dependencies. For a moment, nothing happened. Then latency spiked. Queues backed up. The system responded the only way it knew how, by tightening further. Restricted mode deepened. What Evan saw was a glitch. What the system executed was a contractual defense. They believed it was a software bug that needed force. They didn't understand it was a legal wall, one that required someone with the right key to pass through it. Peak traffic always arrives quietly. There's no warning siren when thousands of shipments sync at once, when payment authorizations stack up across time zones, when reconciliation scripts begin their hourly sweep. It just builds layer by layer until the system is carrying more than it looks like it is. By 6:42 p.m., Atlas was operating in restricted mode and under peak load. Skyhammer didn't understand the dependency mapping. Yes, they saw controllers. They saw cues. They saw throttling. What they didn't see was how tightly every layer was braided together. Let's clear the backlog. Their lead said they rebooted a routing controller without draining active traffic. For 3 seconds, nothing obvious happened. Then the first flicker, latency doubled. Retry loops spiked. Transaction queues began to swell. Atlas responded exactly as designed. Protect data first. Secondary nodes isolated. High-risk transactions paused. Cross-region replication slowed to prevent corruption. It wasn't a single explosion. It was structural stress spreading outward. Payment confirmations stalled mid-process. Logistics vendors couldn't reconcile inventory in real time. Financial dashboards froze on half-processed numbers. A few of the largest institutional clients noticed within minutes. One called their account manager. Another called a board member directly. The third skipped layers entirely. Within 10 minutes, the Vantabridge board line was ringing with people who measured loss in 6 figures per minute. Skyhammer dialed into another call. We're seeing unexpected cascade behavior, the technician admitted. We can't stabilize throughput. On the other end, Evan went silent. Money doesn't fear villains. It doesn't fear ambition. It fears uncertainty. And uncertainty had just entered the system. With every stalled authorization and every frozen ledger entry, it was burning through roughly $10,000 per second and climbing. For the first time that evening, Evan understood something was no longer under his control. We were in a small diner 2 blocks from our temporary office when my phone lit up again. Nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights, vinyl booths, grease in the air, 6 exhausted engineers pretending not to watch the news on the muted television above the counter. No one was celebrating. We were just breathing. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. Then another message from Iris. They pushed Evan out of the room. They're calling you. I stepped outside before answering. The night air was cool. The city sounded normal traffic. Laughter. A siren somewhere far away. None of it matched the tension in my chest. I answered on the 3rd ring. Mara. A familiar board member said, voice clipped, stripped of ceremony. We need you to come back immediately. As a matter of responsibility. Responsibility. I almost smiled. With respect, I said evenly. I no longer have any responsibility to Vantabridge. A pause. The system is destabilizing. He pressed. We're losing institutional clients. I'm aware. We expect you to assist in stabilizing Atlas. There it was. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something in between pride and panic. I have a solution. I replied. For the situation you're currently in. Another pause. Longer this time. But if we're going to talk, it won't be through Evan. Silence stretched across the line. He's still VP, the board member said carefully. Then he can stay VP. I answered. Just not the one negotiating with me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was clear. They had removed me as an employee. They had no authority left over me. Only need. And need changes the balance of power faster than any title ever could. Why is it that the people who dismiss you as unnecessary are always the first to call when everything begins to fail? We didn't walk back into Vantabridge like heroes. We walked in like surgeons. No speeches. No eye contact with the open floor. Just laptops, cables, and 6 people who knew exactly where the pressure points were. The board was already assembled in the glass conference room. Evan stood near the screen, pale but composed, as if still trying to hold on to the image of authority. I placed a single document on the table before we even opened a terminal. Before we begin, I said calmly, every technical change during stabilization will require a signed risk acceptance form. Evan frowned. That's excessive. It's standard when compliance thresholds have already been breached. I replied, every override, every throttle adjustment, every rollback attempt documented and signed. Signed by whom one board member asked quietly. I turned to Evan. By the acting executive responsible for operational authority? Silence. That meant him. If anything went wrong under my guidance, if a decision escalated damage instead of containing it, Evan would carry personal legal exposure. Not the company. Not the team. Him. His jaw tightened. "You're shifting liability," he said. "No," I answered. "I'm restoring accountability." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he reached for the pen. The first signature was hesitant. The second, firmer. We began immediately. Traffic was rerouted manually. Controllers drained properly. Dependency mapping was rebuilt node by node. At one point, a replication queue nearly collapsed, and for 2 full minutes, no one in the room breathed. 4 hours later, throughput stabilized. Transaction queues cleared, status page green. No applause followed. Just exhaustion. Evan wasn't fired. He remained VP in title, but operational authority no longer lived with him. Every future high-risk change required documentation, review, and his signature beneath a paragraph that made consequences explicit. He had become the face that signed risk nothing more. The board approved my conditions' full budget for failover upgrades, autonomous staffing control, no interference in compliance operations. I won, but I paid. While we were in crisis mode, a private consulting client withdrew an offer I had been negotiating for weeks. Timing concerns. They said, I didn't argue. Responsibility has a cost. I've always known that. Later, as I packed up to leave the building again, this time on my terms, I looked at the glowing dashboards behind the glass walls. Systems don't run on ego. They run on people who understand what they're doing. If this story made you stop and think, hit like to support, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment with your perspective. We read everyone. The word landed before I finished my sentence. Not loud, not angry. Just dropped there. Flat and final, like a door clicking shut. Impossible. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look annoyed. He leaned back, fingers folded over his stomach, and glanced past me toward the screen as if the slide itself had wasted his time. The room smelled like burnt coffee and that industrial cleaner they used every morning, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. I kept standing there anyway. Stupid. Maybe. Hope is a stubborn reflex. I'd spent months on that plan. Nights. Weekends. Running numbers after dinner. Sketching workflows on scrap paper. Watching production logs stack up like warnings nobody wanted to read. Automation where we were bleeding labor hours. Data tracking where we were guessing. Predictive maintenance instead of waiting for machines to fail in the middle of a shift. It was not flashy. It was practical. It would have slowed the market share slide everyone pretended not to see. He waved his hand once, like brushing away a fly. We are not a tech experiment. He said, we make things. That proposal is impossible. No questions. No follow-up. He turned to the next agenda item. I closed my laptop slowly. The click sounded louder than it should have. A couple of people avoided my eyes. One of them gave me that tight smile people use when they are relieved it is not them. My name is Jolene Harper. I am 43 years old. I'd been at that company 14 years. Long enough to remember when stability meant competence, not fear. Long enough to believe that if you showed your work, someone would listen. 3 months later, human resources walked me through the exit process. Same carpet, same neutral voice. They said the role was no longer aligned with company direction. They said thank you for your contributions. They handed me a box that was lighter than it should have been. I did not argue. There was nothing left to explain. When I walked out of the building, my badge already dead in my pocket, it finally clicked. I had not been fired because the plan was wrong. I had been fired because it asked them to change. I stepped into the parking lot, the air cold and metallic, and realized I had not left the idea behind. I had carried it with me the whole way out. It took me longer than I want to admit to stop blaming myself. For days after the firing, I replayed the meeting like a bad voicemail. Maybe I talked too fast. Maybe I should have eased into the numbers. Maybe I scared them with the word automation. I almost rewrote the plan out of habit. Like if I fixed it enough times, it would retroactively save me. Then I remembered what didn't happen. The CEO never asked a question. Not one. I'd worked under him long enough to recognize the pattern. When he didn't understand something, he interrupted. When he didn't like something, he argued. Silence meant something else entirely. A week before my firing, I'd overheard him in a smaller meeting, door half open. He was talking to two executives who'd been there even longer than me. We survived the recession by not panicking, he said. By holding the line. One of them nodded. Stability is why clients trust us. And I'm not going to be the guy who blows that up chasing trends. The CEO said. His voice wasn't angry. It was tight. Controlled. No one pushed back. That was the moment I'd missed at the time. The part where fear put on a suit and called itself leadership. I wasn't fired because my plan failed. It never got the chance. I was fired because it introduced risk in a room full of people who'd built their careers avoiding it. They didn't want to be remembered as the ones who changed things. They wanted to be remembered as the ones who kept the lights on. Once I saw that, something in me settled. Not relief, not anger, just clarity. They hadn't rejected me. They'd protected themselves. And that meant the idea was still alive. It just needed air. Unemployment does a weird things to time. Days stretched, nights collapsed. I kept opening my email like something might apologize to me. That's when I found the message. It was buried in my inbox, dated months back, from a smaller competitor I'd met at an industry roundtable. Back then, I'd skimmed it and thought, I'm loyal. I don't do that. I'd archived it without replying. Moral high ground, very noble, very stupid. The subject line was still there. Short, direct, no fluff. Interested in talking, I stared at it longer than I should have. My first instinct was embarrassment. Like replying now would announce how desperate I'd become. I closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it again. I told myself I wasn't trying to get even. That mattered to me, for some reason. I wasn't angry enough for revenge. I was tired. I needed to know if the idea worked anywhere at all. I drafted a reply, deleted it, drafted another, deleted that too. Eventually, I typed, "Hey, still interested in that conversation." I hated how small it sounded. They replied the same afternoon. Absolutely, the email said. We'd liked how you think. No sales pitch. No pity. Just that. The call was awkward at first. I talked too fast. I over-explained. Old habits. Then their operations lead cut in. Can you walk us through the part you think saves the most money, he asked? Not why, not what if. Just how. I talked for 15 minutes straight. No slides, no polish. Just the bones of it. When I stopped, there was a pause, long enough to scare me. Then someone said, "Okay, let's see if we can test this." I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat there, heart pounding, realizing I'd done the one thing I'd promised myself I wouldn't let happen. I hadn't let the idea die quietly. Their skepticism didn't feel like a wall. It felt like friction. The useful kind. The first meeting was short. No big table. No rehearsed smiles. Just a few people on a call. Cameras on, notebooks out. "So what breaks first?" One of them asked. Straight out of the gate, I answered honestly. The timeline? If we rush it, the data's garbage. Another voice jumped in. "What does this cost if it only half works?" I gave them the number. In full, no hedging, no soft language. There was a pause. I waited for the laugh. It didn't come. "That's tight," someone said. "We can't afford mistakes at that scale." I know, I said. "That's why I want to start smaller." How small, the operations lead asked. I told them. Smaller than I wanted. Smaller than what would impress anyone. "That won't move the needle," he said. "It will prove the math," I said. "Or it'll prove I'm wrong." That landed differently. They didn't sell me on vision. They didn't promise growth or disruption or whatever word was trending that week. They pushed back. Hard. On timelines. On assumptions. On me. At one point, the finance director said, "If this fails, we eat the cost." "You're sure about this?" I swallowed. "I'm sure enough to own it." Another pause. "Okay," she said. "One pilot. Limited scope. Fixed budget. No extensions. That was it." No applause, no congratulations. After the call, the operations lead stayed on for a second. "Just so we're clear," he said. "This isn't a bet on you. It's a bet on whether the idea survives contact with reality. I can live with that," I said, when the screen went dark. I sat there longer than necessary, not relieved, not excited, just steady. For the first time since I'd been fired, I didn't feel like I was asking for permission to exist. I had something to build. The pilot didn't explode. That was the first thing I checked. Not the upside. Not the potential. Just whether anything had broken hard enough to get noticed. 3 weeks in, the operations lead called no warm-up, no tone setting, cycle times down 7%. He said, labor hours too. I stayed quiet, don't get excited. He added, it's early. I know. I said, we only touched the section you scoped. He went on, didn't ripple anywhere else. That's the whole point. I said, he exhaled. Not relief. Acceptance. We'll keep it running. The line went dead. I opened the spreadsheet again, refreshed it again. Same numbers. Still there. I hated that part of myself. Like if I didn't stare at it long enough, it might decide it wasn't real. That afternoon, Mark texted, you hear about North Ridge? They pulled the contract. He wrote, procurement email went out by mistake. Got forwarded around before anyone caught it. North Ridge wasn't flashy. It was steady. One of those accounts that quietly kept a whole shift busy. Why I typed, official story, he replied. Cost overruns. Delays. I imagined the production calendar. The overtime requests. The maintenance tickets no one closed. Leadership worried, I typed, then immediately regretted sending it. There was a long pause. They're calling it noise. Mark finally wrote, temporary. That night, I sent our pilot numbers to finance. Clean, conservative, no framing, no victory lap. She replied fast, this holds. Let's not outrun it. I closed my laptop and sat there longer than I needed to. 2 systems moving in opposite directions. One carefully, one pretending nothing was wrong. It wasn't collapsing. Not yet. Scaling always sounds clean in meetings. It isn't. The second phase started with a call at 6:45 in the morning. We pushed it to the next line. The operations lead said, something's off. I didn't ask what. I already knew. It's the sensor lag, I said. We tuned it for lower volume. Silence. You didn't mention that risk. He said, I did. I said, you just didn't like how boring it sounded. He sighed. Can you fix it? Yes, I said. Then added, if we slow the throughput for 2 days, another pause. Longer this time. That's going to cost us, the finance director said. Roughly $100,000 a do. I know, I said. Or it's going to cost more later. They muted themselves. I watched the little icon flicker while my stomach tightened. This was the part I'd been fired before reaching. The moment where confidence stops being theoretical. They came back. Do it, she said. But this is the last adjustment. I stayed up 2 nights straight. Not heroics. Damage control. I found a shortcut I'd taken in the original model and hated myself for it. Fixed it anyway. Pushed the update. Watched the numbers settle. On the 3rd morning, the operations lead called again. Cycle times down 12%. He said, scraps down 2. And the lag I asked, gone. He said, then, quieter. You were right. That sentence landed harder than praise. Later that week, we sat in a review call. No slides, just data. This scales. The finance director said, not everywhere, but enough. The product head leaned forward. Why didn't your old company build this? I answered before thinking, because it looks worse before it looks better. No one argued. When the call ended, I stayed at my desk, hands still on the keyboard. I didn't feel proud. I felt steady, like I'd stepped onto solid ground after months of guessing. The idea wasn't fragile anymore. It could take hits. It could survive scrutiny, and somewhere across town. A company that once called it impossible was still pretending the math hadn't changed. The report didn't come from Mark. It came from finance. A dry industry brief forwarded with one line at the top. Thought you'd want eyes on this. I did. My old company sat dead center on the page. Market share down. Not a cliff. A slide. A few points shaved off like it was nothing. 2 accounts marked reallocated. One of them was ours. 10 minutes later, another email hit my inbox. Internal. Forwarded again by accident. External messaging guidance. Please align language before speaking with clients. That was new. Mark called after lunch. He sounded off. They had an all hands. He said, CEO took it himself. What did he say? I asked. That volatility's hitting everyone. Mark said. That this dip's temporary. That we're still the industry standard. I heard movement on his end. Voices dropping when he spoke. Anyone push back? I asked. He laughed once. Short. No one with a mortgage. Later that afternoon, the clip showed up on LinkedIn. The CEO on stage at a regional conference, smiling like the floor wasn't shifting under him. We don't chase every trend, he said. Consistency is our advantage. I watched it once. Then again, he believed it. That was the part that stuck. On our side, leadership met the same data with none of the theater. This isn't about winning headlines. Finance said, it's about staying ahead of erosion. If we slow down now, ops added. Someone else defines the baseline. No one argued. That night, Mark texted instead of calling. They froze hiring. He wrote. A minute later, another message popped up. Don't reply for a bit. IT's monitoring traffic. I set my phone face down. The numbers on my screen didn't flinch. They didn't care who spoke louder, or calmer, or with more confidence behind a microphone. They just kept moving. And explaining them was starting to sound like lying. They moved fast once they finally moved. Too fast. Mark sent me a calendar invite screenshot first. Red blocks stacked on top of each other. Emergency Steering Committee, Digital Transformation Task Force, External Advisory Review. Consultants showed up next. Expensive ones. The kind who talk in frameworks and leave behind slides no one owns. Mark said the hallways filled up with strangers carrying branded notebooks and confidence. They're rebuilding the plane mid-air, he said over the phone. His voice sounded thinner than usual. What are they building? I asked. That's the problem, he said. No one agrees. They rolled out a pilot of their own, slapped together, different vendors, no integration. A dashboard that looked impressive in screenshots and fell apart under load. Mark told me about the demo. The CEO kept saying phase 1, he said, over and over. Like that explained why it didn't work. Did anyone mention the gaps? I asked. People tried. He said they got talked over. I watched from a distance as press releases went out faster than fixes. Promises piled up on top of unfinished work. Every solution introduced 3 new problems because no one had the patience to slow down. On our side, we paused expansion, not because we were scared, because we knew what rushed change looked like. In one of our internal calls, the finance director said it out loud. They waited too long. She said, now every move feels like a gamble. No one disagreed. That night, I sat with my laptop open and pulled up the original version of my plan. The one I'd pitched a year ago. It was cautious, boring, measured. It would have worked. That was the part that hurt. They hadn't failed because the idea was wrong. They failed because they fired the people willing to be uncomfortable early. Once those voices were gone, change turned into theater. Loud, directionless, late. Mark texted one last update before midnight. They're asking who signed off on this. He wrote, like blame is going to glue it back together. I closed the laptop. The point of no return had passed quietly. No announcement, no single bad decision. Just a lot of motion where listening should have been. The layoffs didn't start with an announcement. They never do. They started with calendar blocks disappearing, then access issues, then desks going quiet. I found out from Denise. She called me from her car, voice low, like the sound might travel. They cut my whole group. She said, effective today. Denise had been there longer than me. She believed in leadership, defended them in meetings I'd stopped attending months before I left. I thought if we just stayed steady, they'd figure it out, she said. I didn't interrupt. There was nothing to correct. They told us it wasn't performance. She went on. Just restructuring. That's what they always call it. I said. She laughed once. Sharp? Yeah, funny how it always hits the same people. She asked how I was doing. I hated that question in that moment. I'm working. I said, it's going okay. There was a pause. Heavy. I could feel the distance between us stretch. I'm glad one of us landed. She said, not bitter? Just tired. I wish it didn't come to this. I said, so do I. She said, we warned them. After we hung up, I sat there longer than I meant to. No relief. No sense of being right, just a dull ache where something fixable had broken anyway. Later that week, Mark texted again. They're offering severance. He wrote, 3 months. That's it. I knew what that meant. They were conserving cash, counting weeks. At our company, the finance director mentioned headcount planning, not cuts. Planning. Different language, different posture. This is what timing buys you, she said. I didn't feel proud. I felt older. This wasn't a scoreboard. These were people, careers, rent payments, kids in college. All the things that never show up in strategy decks. The cost of fear had finally arrived. And it wasn't theoretical anymore. The word bankruptcy never showed up in a press release. It leaked instead. A lender backing out. A line of credit under review. Everyone pretending not to hear the same thing. Mark told me during a quick call. They're running out of time. He said, cash is tight. Vendors want upfront payment now. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. At my new company, the tone was different. Same market, same pressure. But our system was holding, expanding, even. The operations lead said it in a meeting like it was just another data point. This platform is now core. He said, we don't move without it. Core, that word sat heavy. Someone asked if we should expect pushback from competitors. The finance director answered before I could. They had their chance. She said, this is execution. I thought about the CEO. Not angry, not smug, just scared. A man who mistook stillness for safety and paid for it in market share, credibility, and the company he was supposed to protect. Later that night, Denise texted me. She'd found contract work. Not ideal, enough to breathe. Guess you were right. She wrote. I stared at the message. Then typed back, I just didn't want us to wait. That's the part I want people to hear. Waiting feels responsible. It looks calm. It sounds mature in boardrooms. But sometimes it's just fear dressed up as caution. If you're sitting on an idea right now, wondering whether to speak up or stay safe, I won't tell you it ends clean. It doesn't. You lose things either way. But silence has a price. And I've watched what happens when a company decides it's cheaper to pay it later. If this story sounds familiar, say something. Share it. Talk about it. We don't change systems by pretending they don't scare us. The first thing she said to me wasn't, thank you for your work. It wasn't even, this is hard. It was, don't dirty my hands. Yeah, that. My name is Elowyn Price. I am 42 years old. I was sitting in a glass conference room that always smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. The kind of room where people pretend everything is clean. Clarissa Vaughn sat across from me. CEO, perfect hair, perfect posture. Like she ironed herself every morning. HR was already there. Folder open. They didn't waste time. Organizational restructuring, Clarissa said. Flat. Like she was reading the weather. They slid the severance agreement toward me. 12 weeks of pay. Health benefits through the end of the quarter. A broad non-disparagement clause that basically said I couldn't say anything negative about the company, its leadership, or its operations, anything that might harm reputation. I read it twice. I swear my hands didn't even shake. I'm going to activate my meeting notes app. I said, just to log transition instructions. Clarissa waved her hand. Fine. It records voice to text automatically. Timestamps, sends a copy to my archive. I use it all the time for compliance meetings. Nothing secret about it. She kept talking about transition plans like I was already gone. A week ago, I'd filed a sterilization compliance report. Nothing dramatic, just data, just numbers that didn't add up. But we had an investor roadshow coming up, and suddenly I was restructuring. I signed the acknowledgement that I received the offer. Not the agreement itself. That part matters. Then I stood up. I don't even know why. Habit, I guess. I extended my hand. Clarissa looked at it. Actually looked at it like it was something sticky. Don't dirty my hands. HR shifted in her chair. For a second, I felt heat rise up my neck. I wanted to say something smart, something sharp. Instead, I said, you just made a mistake. I don't know why I said that. It just came out. HR jumped in. You'll need to sign the full agreement within 24 hours. Otherwise, the terms may change. May change. That's how they phrase threats. While she was talking, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. Archive sync complete. If this was just restructuring, why the rush? Why the pressure? When I stepped out of that room, I already knew this wasn't about my job. It was about something I'd written down. And I wasn't done reading. I didn't go home after the meeting. I went back to my office, or what was still technically my office, for a few more hours. I pulled my original contract out of the bottom drawer. I always kept a paper copy. People laugh at that, until they don't. 6 years ago. They recruited me right after the company got slapped with an FDA warning letter, production delays, sterilization variants, nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare investors. Back then, it wasn't Clarissa who interviewed me. It was 2 board members and the general counsel. One of them had said, "We need someone who can speak up without fear." I'd replied, then put it in writing. That's how Section 7.3 happened. It gave me the right to report safety concerns internally, direct access to the audit committee, protection from retaliation. And this part mattered. No post-employment agreement could override those rights. I remember the general counsel sliding the red-lined draft across the table. "This is unusual," he said. "So is getting an FDA warning." I answered. They approved it. Now I read the severance agreement again. The non-disparagement clause was broad. No carve-out for whistleblowing. No mention of statutory protections. Just blanket silence. That's not standard language for a compliance hire. Not in Minneapolis. Not in medical devices. I called Daniel, the in-house lawyer I used to work with on audit reviews. "They're pushing a clean NDA," he asked. "Clean for them." I said, "Not for me." He went quiet for a second. If 7.3 is still in force, that's not just HR paperwork. That's governance. Governance. That word carries weight in a boardroom. I hadn't even left the parking lot when the email came through. Subject line, severance agreement. Action required. I opened it sitting in my car, hand still on the steering wheel. You are required to execute the agreement within 24 hours. Failure to execute may impact terms. May impact terms. That's corporate for sign. Or we make this worse. There was a second line. System access has been suspended pending transition. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Just because it was obvious. I replied before I could talk myself out of it. I'm requesting 7 days to review with independent counsel. 5 minutes later, HR responded, "The offer is tied to the current fiscal window. No extensions. 24 hours is the standard window." Standard. For who I typed again. "Please confirm in writing that no extension will be granted and that severance terms may change if I don't sign within 24 hours. She answered in under 2 minutes. Confirmed. There it was. Clean. Documented. 2 hours later, I drove back to the building to finish pulling compliance files I'd been organizing. My badge didn't beep green. It blinked red. Security shrugged. System says inactive. I checked my phone. My company email was gone. My shared drive access revoked. The deadline hadn't expired. I texted Daniel. They locked me out. Before the deadline, he wrote back. Yes, he didn't respond right away. That scared me more than anything. I sat on the concrete step outside the entrance. Wind cutting across the lot. My phone screen reflected my face back at me. I looked tired. Older. I started documenting. Screenshots of the access denial. Timestamps on my email requests. Cloud logs showing file uploads that had been running when they shut me out. I didn't call HR, didn't argue. I just preserved everything. Tell me something. If this was just paperwork, why cut off my access before I even had the chance to say no? The letter arrived by courier the next morning. Thick envelope. Corporate letterhead. No greeting. Termination for cause. Insubordination. I read it twice. Then a third time. They accused me of data exfiltration, claiming my final cloud uploads were an attempt to steal proprietary IP, rather than a legitimate transition of files, and that I refused to cooperate. The letter stated, I opened my laptop. Upload logs still showed active transfers when my access was cut. Email chain showed I had sent credentials to the operations lead. Timestamps didn't lie. I replied in one line. Please confirm date of disciplinary hearing under Section 14.1 of my employment agreement. That section requires documentation. A hearing? An opportunity to respond? No answer. Instead, a second email. This one from corporate legal. Reminder of your continuing confidentiality obligations. Unauthorized disclosure may result in legal action. There it was. Not about transition, not about attitude, about silence. I called Daniel. They escalated. I said, Takasi asked. Yes, he exhaled slowly. That's aggressive. My files were uploading when they locked me out. I know. You think they'll sue me. Only if they think you'll back down. I hung up and stared at the kitchen table. The wood smelled faintly like old coffee. My mortgage payment was due in 3 weeks. My dad's assisted care wasn't cheap. This industry is small. Word spreads fast. I swear. For a second, I considered signing just to make it stop. Then I thought about that sterilization report sitting in their inbox. Daniel called me that afternoon. His voice sounded different, lower, filled with the anxiety of a man caught between his conscience and his paycheck. Legal reviewed everything. He said, and I asked, no performance improvement plan, no misconduct record, no disciplinary hearing. And they revoked your access before the deadline even expired. I know. Section 7.3 is still valid. That's not just standard HR language. That's board-approved governance. So they'll fix it, I asked. I almost hated how hopeful I sounded. They recommended settling under your original severance terms. But Clarissa overrode the recommendation. In writing, I leaned back in my chair. The radiator near the window clicked and hissed. Why, I said. Daniel didn't answer right away. There's an investor presentation in 3 weeks. He finally said, the roadshow is the ghost haunting every corridor of the executive wing. Clarissa needs the sterilization data to look flawless to satisfy the private equity vultures circling the scene. Any red flag in a compliance report, especially one involving batch variances, would trigger a mandatory due diligence deep dive. It would delay the funding round by months. Or worse, slash the company's valuation by half before the first slide is even shown. I let that sit. The silence on the line felt heavy. So this isn't about me. No, it's about optics. She's not just firing you, she's trying to bury the report under the noise of a contentious termination. If she can paint you as a disgruntled employee fired for cause, your report becomes tainted evidence in the eyes of the board. They'll see it as a desperate attempt at revenge, not a legitimate safety concern. And if I challenge it, then it becomes a breach of fiduciary duty. I laughed once. Short, not amused. She was gambling with patient safety and the integrity of the medical devices just to keep an investor deck clean. She wasn't just ironed and perfect. She was hollow. She overrode her own legal department to avoid looking weak, I said, or to avoid looking exposed. There's a massive difference between the two. One is an ego problem. The other is a crime. I stared at the termination letter again. They were betting I wouldn't escalate, that I'd protect my career over my claws, that I was too scared of the industry's blacklist to fight back. They were wrong. I wasn't just a compliance officer. I was the person who knew where the bones were buried because I was the one who refused to dig the graves. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 3 a.m, I opened my laptop and started drafting. Not an angry email, not a social media post, a formal complaint. Wrongful termination, breach of contract, procedural unfair dismissal, retaliation, duress. Each word felt heavy. Each one meant escalation. I called Daniel before I hit submit. If you file, he said, this doesn't stay in HR. That's the point. You understand it triggers board-mandated protocols review. I wrote section 7.3. I know what it triggers. Silence. Are you ready for this? He asked. No, I said honestly, but I'm done pretending this is paperwork. I attached the sterilization compliance report. The same one Clarissa had skimmed and dismissed as timing sensitive. The one that flagged irregular sterilization cycle data across 2 batches. Nothing explosive. Just enough to matter. You sure you want that in there? Daniel asked. If this is retaliation, then context matters. Under company bylaws, any retaliation allegation tied to compliance reporting must be disclosed to the audit committee. That means board visibility. That means oversight. I filled out the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry form carefully. Dates, attachments, timeline. I double-checked the section referencing access revocation before the deadline. My finger hovered over submit for a second. This wasn't just about 12 weeks of severance. It was about whether internal controls rules meant anything when tested. I clicked submit within 20 minutes. I received confirmation of filing. By end of day, the internal portal showed the audit committee had flagged the filing. Audit committee notification went out. It left HR. It left Clarissa's control. The company didn't fold. Of course they didn't. Their attorney opened with, "The non-disparagement clause is standard practice across the organization." My lawyer, Marisol, didn't blink. "Then you'll have documentation of policy distribution." A pause. It was communicated during restructuring meetings. Corporate counsel said, Marisol leaned forward. "Please produce the written policy, the circulation date, and acknowledgement records." Nothing. No attachment, no follow-up email. So they pivoted. The company acknowledges the recording, but we contend that the context of restructuring was a collective business decision, not a targeted dismissal. I almost laughed. Instead, I slid my laptop across the table. Cloud timestamps. I said, automatic archive logs, external sync at the moment of recording. Marisol added, "And here's the email from Human Resources approving the activation of the note application at the start of the meeting." Corporate counsel scanned it. His jaw tightened just slightly. Clarissa didn't look at me. She looked at him. He tried again. Even so, internal restructuring decisions fall under executive discretion. Marisol didn't miss a beat. Executive discretion doesn't eliminate contractual procedure. That shifted the room. They weren't arguing about tone anymore. They were arguing about rules. And the rules were written down. Counsel shuffled papers, searching for something that wasn't there. For the first time, their confidence thinned. The hearing room smelled faintly like old carpet and coffee that had sat too long on a burner. No drama, just folding tables and a digital recorder blinking red. Clarissa sat 3 seats down from me, navy suit. Perfect posture. She didn't look at me once. The administrative judge flipped through the file. "Ms. Price," she said, "you were initially informed your role was eliminated due to restructuring, yes." She turned to the company's attorney. "And later terminated for cause, yes, Your Honor." "Why did the reason change?" The attorney cleared his throat. Subsequent information revealed insubordination. The judge didn't look convinced. "What information?" He shuffled papers. "Failure to complete transition." I leaned forward. "My access was revoked before the deadline expired." The judge glanced at my exhibits. "I see timestamps." She turned to the company again. "Why was access revoked before the 24-hour deadline silence?" Clarissa's attorney tried to recover. "Access suspension is standard during sensitive transitions." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Even before the agreement window closes." No one answered. She flipped to another section. "Was a disciplinary hearing conducted under Section 14.1? The attorney hesitated. "It was not deemed necessary. Procedure is not optional." The judge said, calm, not loud, just final. Marisol slid the transcript forward. "May we read the relevant excerpt?" The judge nodded. Marisol read aloud. "Steady your role is eliminated. No mention of misconduct. No reference to insubordination." The judge looked at Clarissa for the first time. At what point did the alleged misconduct occur? Clarissa's jaw tightened. After she resisted transition, I spoke before I could stop myself. I requested time to review the agreement. The judge held up her hand, and that request is documented. She leaned back slightly. This appears less like misconduct and more like escalation following a refusal to sign. The CFO shifted in his seat. I could hear the faint hum of the air vent above us. Then the judge said the sentence that changed the temperature in the room. The employer failed to follow its own governance framework. Not just contract, board-mandated protocols. That's bigger. Boards listen when that word shows up in a ruling. Clarissa finally looked at me. Not angry, just calculating. The judge closed the folder. I will issue a written decision. I walked out of that room shaking, but not from fear. The administrative law judge's ruling arrived via the e-filing portal, 12 pages of clinical, devastating prose. No drama, just 12 pages and a digital signature. I opened it at my kitchen table. The screen light made everything look harsher than it was. Marisol called as I was scrolling. "You're going to want to read page 7 slowly," she said. I did. Severance agreement invalid due to unreasonable review period. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. She continued. "Termination for a cause procedurally defective? That's clean." I said, "It gets cleaner. Retaliation claim credible." There it was. Not proven beyond all doubt. Not poetic. Just credible. Award granted. 12 weeks severance. 8 weeks additional damages. Legal fees. Continuation of benefits. Short. Clinical. Final. Marisol's voice softened. "You won." I stared at the line that mattered most. Employer disregarded established governance protections. Fiduciary duty. That word again. "They'll pay?" I asked. "They have 14 days. I closed my laptop slowly. It wasn't about the money anymore. 12 weeks. 8 more. That helps. Sure. Mortgage doesn't care about principal. But this ruling isn't private. Public record. Searchable. Downloadable. The company wired the money on day 10. 12 weeks of severance. 8 weeks additional damages. Legal fees. Benefits continuation. Clean. Transactional. Marisol called. They complied. Of course they did. I said, they don't want enforcement proceedings. The ruling didn't disappear. It got picked up by a compliance journal out of Chicago. Small publication. But in medical devices, small journals get read by very serious people. 3 weeks later, Daniel texted me. Audit committee opened an independent review of what I asked. Internal controls override. Retaliation exposure. Safety escalation protocol. Then another message a month after that. D&O insurance premiums increased. Carrier cited procedural failure. That's the kind of sentence that makes boards nervous. At the next quarterly investor call, someone asked about recent governance findings. I wasn't on the call. I didn't need to be. 6 months later, Clarissa Vaughn stepped down to pursue other opportunities. No apology, no dramatic exit, just corporate language. Daniel called again. "It's done." He said, "No, I told him. It's recorded." I started at a new firm across the river. Smaller team. Less ego in the room. On my first day, one of the board members came to meet me in person. We read the ruling. He said, "We prefer people who follow procedure." He held out his hand. I looked at it for half a second. Old reflex. Then I shook it. Firm. No hesitation. I won't lie. There were nights I almost signed that agreement just to keep things quiet. Mortgage. My dad's care. Reputation. It would have been easier. But here's what I learned. And you can take it or leave it. Write things down. Insist on clauses. Keep records. Don't rely on tone or goodwill when power shifts. Paper survives longer than pride. If you ever find yourself in a room where someone tells you not to dirty their hands, remember, this dignity doesn't make noise. It documents. She believed power lived in a gesture, but it lived in a clause she chose to ignore. And honestly, if you've ever had to choose between comfort and principle, I'd like to hear how you handled it.